shall we switch gears and talk a little bit more about Dad and family?
About the most important things in my life, we've not said a word.
All right. Well, we said a word. We left you with 3 small kids in 1958, being asked to teach evidence. But that must have been one of the really challenging parts of being a successful lawyer at a time when there were so few women in the profession, is feeling stretched to also be a mom. What was that like for you?
Don't you remember 1958? You were 10 days old when they asked me.
Right.
It was a big stretch in terms of not of the desire to do it or the capability but putting in the work, the time was really hard. But by that time, I guess I felt that yes, it would require a lot of time. But I was married to someone who was so supportive, as I said earlier. I mean, Daddy was just as supportive as could be, and he didn't come from a family where the women were the big important producers of any work. I think I might have been the only non-housewife of the spouses.
Spouses.
Daddy, however, was the baby in his family, so he was different from everybody else. And it was because of him that I went to law school. I started my career as a college student as pre-med. I thought I was going to major in some science and become a physician. And then I met Daddy, and I had already opted to take courses that were not pre-med. Speech, drama, different courses of that sort, and I switched entirely to the English classes. And Daddy and I were dating in his senior year. He had been in the service and came back from the service, so he had actually spent close to 2.5 years in India, so he was very kind of a mysterious, much older man to me when I met him. He was 5 years older and knew a lot about Asia. But he, in his senior year, decided to apply to law school. Now, he hadn't applied a long time ahead of time. And we hadn't really talked about his going to law school. He applied to law school, he got in, and it turned out he really had a burning desire to be a lawyer, not to go to law school. He wasn't happy about getting up to go to class. In fact, that's probably one reason he married me. I used to wake him up. I used to go over, and he'd give me the car at night, and then I could take it over, and I'd go to his house. He lived with his parents. To wake him up so he'd get to school. And he still missed a reasonable number of the first hour classes. Anyway, it was really in the course of his going to law school that I became interested in the law. He had these case books, the ones I talked about, not seeing so many in Harry Foster's office. He had these case books, and he used to bring them home, and as you know, you're supposed to brief cases. You read the case, and then you go through doing a brief in a set fashion. The facts of the case, God, I haven't thought this in a long time. No, the action, what kind of action it was, then the facts of the case, then the issue, what was the issue for the court, then the holding of the court, and then the reasoning. And that's the first time I've thought about how to brief a case since I was back in law school. Anyway, I used to do that with him. And I thought it was fascinating. He thought it was boring. And the more of the cases I read, the more I was fascinated by it. So that when it came time that year for the LSATs to be given, I decided, well, what a lark, I'll take the LSAT. And apparently, I learned later, I did really, really well on the LSAT. And got into Pitt, like that, no problem at all. And it turned out that law school and learning to be a lawyer were just, it just seemed so natural to me. It just seemed so an inevitable part of my evolution as a person. I loved studying the law. I enjoy reading cases to this day.
So, starting out, I'm sure having kids was a little bit
Daunting.
Yeah. Do you feel now
Jumping.
that you were too young when you started the family?
Yes.
What would have been?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go back and have it any way now because I got who I got, and I like everybody I got. So if I had done it some other way, maybe I wouldn't get such good ones.
Yeah.
No, I got 3 good kids, a great husband. So even though I was too young, I was 22 years old, just 22, when I got married. And, when you're 22, you don't know anything. But fortunately, I lucked out. And now, when I first had the kids and I was in practice, I used to feel all the time, I used to feel like I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul. I worried a lot. We made certain rules. We'd have dinner with our kids every night. We wouldn't go away on weekends, mostly. We'd spend weekends with our kids.
What sorts of things did we do on the weekends? Do you remember?
Well, yes, because my children were very assertive. So after they got on to this custom of Mother's Day and then Father's Day, they said, "Where is Children's Day?"
That's the oldest trick in the book. And the answer,
I
of
was
course,
too dumb to
is
know.
every day is Children's Day. But go ahead.
Now you tell me. You can use it for your grandchildren.
Right. Thanks.
But so we not only had Children's Day, we had July was Jessica Day, August was Hannah Day, and September was Harry Day. And what we used to do is they got to pick. We usually went to somewhere for a weekend. We'd go on a Friday night and have dinner and stay somewhere. We used to go to Nemacolin. We used to go to there was a place, I can't remember the name of it, that had a theater in connection with it. You don't remember either. But we went to places that were close enough to drive to, maybe a couple hours away, and we'd stay overnight and we'd have dinner and we'd go horseback riding. Not me, but things that the kids liked we would do. And we did try to breakfast. I had a rule. I had to make breakfast for the kids and pack lunches before they went to school. I was very big on that. But I will tell you,
Some lunches they were. I can mention that the envy of the cafeteria.
It might be the envy of the cafeteria, but I can tell you that my 3 children have different views of the lunches. My son, you just heard his view of the envy of the cafeteria. My daughter Jessica, what do you think about the lunches I used to make, Jess? Did you used to make lunches? She said. So there you have it.
That's funny.
But I was determined not to cheat them out of experiences.
Yeah.
I belonged to the PTA. I was the president of the PTA at school. I became friendly with all their teachers.
Always brought cupcakes on birthdays.
Always brought cupcakes for your birthday.
And then probably back to court. Yeah. Do you remember what other things we would do around Pittsburgh if we didn't go away? Like how you would spend a weekend or a weekday evening?
I don't know what you mean by what we would do if we didn't go away.
Well, would we play? It's before. Did we watch a lot of TV? Did we play cards? Did we go on outings? Did we go visiting people?
We played games sometimes.
What sorts of games?
Monopoly.
Uh-huh.
Things like that. We were not big on sports. I was a pretty inept sports person, so I couldn't do that very well with them. Went to movies. We went to parks.
We did what families do.
We did what families do.
I asked you this about practice, but when you look back on parenting and life as a family, what is the most fun time as you remember it, and what's maybe the least, the less fun?
The most fun time. You're saying fun, but the most joyful time.
Yes.
Were milestones that our kids had, graduating from kindergarten, from 8th grade, from high school. When you were a senior in high school, you got appointed a presidential scholar. So we got invited to Washington, D.C. There was one from every state. Maybe there were two from every state. I have that medal here. I do.
Okay.
I'm going to get it and show it to you, give it to you. So we got to go to Washington and go to the State Department and hear how important our child was. When the girls graduated, that was, not Hannah. Hannah had a lot of colleges, so her college graduation was nothing that I can point to, because she became the alumna of many schools. But Jessica went to Reed, and that was an experience in itself for us. But our children, you say fun. Our children were an adventure. They weren't like everybody else's children.
Were we tough?
I thought you were tough. When I used to get home every night, I used to have 3 figures at the door saying, "He did no, it was her fault. I did this," and she. This was before I got in the door. I used to say what I needed was a decompression chamber to go into, but aside from that, it was fine. I always felt I didn't give my kids enough time, and I used to actually measure how many hours a week I spent with my kids against my sister, how many hours a week she spent with her kids, because she had 3 kids and she wasn't working. And so I felt if I spent as much time with my kids as she spent with hers, at least that gave me some excuse for equity. And I used to actually do that like an idiot.
Well, no, you always made a lot of time.
I tried to make a lot of time, but back then there weren't many support groups for women to say it's good that you're doing this. At that time they told you. In fact, when I started to try cases, people would say to me, "Women jurors are not going to like you. They don't like women lawyers. They don't like women trying cases, and they're going to punish you for not being home taking care of your kids." And I never, ever had that experience. Women jurors were always supportive to me, always. They used to come up and talk to me, after the case, and be so proud that a woman had tried the case. So
there's a story, this isn't about you as parents, but a story I've always was interested in, and I'd like to ask you about now when you were a young married couple, which is the time you and Dad and others went the fire. Can you tell that story?
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes, but it's a very weird story.
I know.
But it's really true.
Yeah.
But I can't expect anybody to believe it.
Yeah.
One night, we decided we were going to drive up to Ligonier. There was a pool at Ligonier, a very large pool that the city had. And we were going to drive up, and it was a hot summer night, and go swimming, not with our kids, just with, you weren't with us on this trip. It was I, my cousin Sam Bankovitz, Joe Esper, Daddy, and me. I think that's it. And so we drove out Route 30, which is how you got up to where we were going. And on the way, as we got kind of close to Ligonier, there was a gas station on the right. And as we drove past, or went to go past the gas station, a man was standing at the pump, and all of a sudden he must have thrown a lighted match or something, or a cigarette down. This flame, a line of flame erupted, and then suddenly the whole gas station, all of the pumps were burning. It was so hot. Our windows were open. Somebody yelled, "Shut the windows," because you could actually feel this rush of intense heat from the fire. We didn't stop. And I don't know why we did. I mean, it seemed obvious that everybody must have been killed in that conflagration. It was so hot. But what we did was, when we got to where we were going, we made a phone call. When we got to the next place we could stop, that was it, maybe like a mile or so down the road, we called the fire station. Or we called, I don't remember if it was 911 or how, when we said there's a terrible fire just started on route whatever it is, and directed them to it. And then we went about our business. When it came time to go home, I guess it was the next day. Maybe it was the weekend. It might have been the next day. We called I think it was Ligonier. It might have been some smaller place, to find out what had happened to the people in the fire. They didn't know what we were talking about. So we called the paper, the Ligonier paper. They didn't know what we were talking about. And so we drove past on the way home. We couldn't find the gas station, or any kind of burned down gas station. And people said there was no fire that night, that there had not been a fire that night. I think maybe once somebody told me there was a fire some years before, just to make it worse. But that's the whole story, and by God, it's a true story. Every one of us in the car would swear to it, but they're all dead except me.
Yeah, I've
It really happened.
I believe you, Mom.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I wanted to ask you about a few like general things. Are you okay? You need
Yeah,
to take a break?
no, I'm okay.
More just looking back on stuff. Anything that you feel like you worried about a lot when you were younger that you wish you hadn't worried about, or things you didn't worry about that you wish you had?
Well, as I said, I always felt as if I was. I always felt when I was here, I felt I was being pulled by there. When I was there, I felt I was being pulled by here. And I'm sorry that I didn't have. I wish I'd have had a role model.
Right.
When I was growing up as a mother and young lawyer, who would have reassured me more. I think I was insecure in myself and my own ability as a mother. I could say to myself, I'm spending a lot of time with them and I love them and so forth. But I would have liked more reassurance that I was a good mother,
Yeah. Do you feel...
I'm not sure that I was. Maybe that's the problem.
Do you feel that you worked too hard?
I think I worked pretty hard.
Yeah. I don't mean as a mother or not as a mother. I'm just trying to, looking back now and thinking about the kind of advice you might give to your grandchildren. Would you feel you should work less than you did, or is it good to have work as the centerpiece of your life?
Well, the one thing I wouldn't do is change it, because it's so gratifying. For example, when you went off to school, you were, the last one. Daddy and I drove you up to Cambridge, and when we left you at that room, and I got back to that car, I cried. So, my life as a mother with children at home was over. But But at the same time, when all my kids went off to school, I wasn't left bereft. I had a job, I had important cases, I had important clients and important things to do, and that I liked. Besides being important, they were gratifying. So the way I worked my life, I wouldn't change. Would I say to somebody else, don't work that hard? I don't know. I think it's such an individual thing. And I worked hard because my father taught me you're supposed to work hard. That's the way it is, And my father never approved of Daddy and I always took vacations. The way we took vacations, before I mentioned there was this academy of trial lawyers with 36 lawyers in it, and I was the only woman. One of those lawyers, an elder statesman, came over to us one day. He had just come back from a trip to somewhere exotic, like maybe India, maybe Italy, somewhere. And he said, don't you two make the same mistake. This is to Daddy. Don't you two make the same mistake that I made. Don't wait to travel until you're too old to really enjoy it. And we really took that to heart. It sounded like very good advice to us. And so we decided, in fact, it was that year that we went away on a long trip for the first time. We decided that we would travel. We always took one big trip with the kids and one big trip without. But and I wouldn't change any of those trips. I felt terrible when I was away from the kids. I felt awful. But I enjoyed the trips very much. So, I wouldn't know what to advise somebody, except I think going places when you're young enough to enjoy them is a very good thing.
What would you want for the grandkids, for your grandkids to have in their lives, if you could?
Love. That's what I'd want them to have in their lives. Yeah. Love.